All right, so you ready to dive into some traditional Chinese medicine formulas with me?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So we're looking at this document today called formulas210.pdf.
Okay.
And it's basically a guide to different TCM formulas. And they're all categorized by syndrome,
Right.
which, if you're into TCM, you know is a really important concept.
Yeah.
And we're talking like really intriguing names here, like ephedra decoction and minor blue dragon
Oh,
decoction.
yeah. Those names are definitely eye-catching. And they really kind of get at one of the core principles of TCM, which is using these like elements of nature, wind, cold, heat, to describe what's out of balance in the body.
I love that.
And then using herbal remedies to try to address those imbalances.
Yeah, it's like they're using the power of nature to like nudge the body back into balance.
Exactly. Exactly.
So cool. In this document, it jumps right into it with exterior wind-cold Taiyang syndrome. And it lists out 6 stages of this syndrome, which is interesting. And then, of course, the formulas for each stage. But one that I thought was interesting was ephedra decoction, also known as ma huang tang. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah, that's right.
It's indicated for no sweat, which I thought was interesting. So can you explain that connection? Like, how does a lack of sweating in TCM indicate a wind-cold diagnosis?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great example of how TCM views symptoms.
Yeah.
It's like a detective trying to figure out what's going on beneath the surface.
Right.
So sweating, in Western medicine, we kind of see it as a nuisance a lot of times. But in TCM, it's actually seen as the body's way of expelling pathogens, expelling what doesn't belong. So when someone has a wind-cold condition, it's almost like that invading wind and cold has created this blockage.
Interesting.
It's preventing the body from releasing those pathogens through sweat.
So the body wants to sweat, but it's like that cold is sort of holding it back.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where ephedra decoction comes in. It's got herbs like ephedra or ma huang, which is known to induce sweating. So it's almost like you're opening up the window on a stuffy day. You're letting that breeze flow through.
So it's not about stopping a natural process, it's about supporting it.
Exactly.
I see. And the document says this formula promotes sweating and releases the exterior, so it sounds like it's really helping the body do what it wants to do anyway.
Yes, and that's the beauty of TCM, right?
Yeah.
Working with the body's natural defenses rather than trying to suppress them.
That's really interesting, that idea of working with the body.
Yeah, it's really at the heart of it.
So, okay, let's maybe shift gears just a little bit and talk about another common imbalance, which is exterior wind heat.
Okay.
So imagine this, right? You're coming down with something, you've got that like scratchy throat, you might have a little bit of a fever. Like those are kind of telltale signs of like wind heat kind of invading the body, right?
Those are our clues.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I see here that, of course, TCM has a very specific approach for this as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, the document highlights a formula called mulberry leaf and chrysanthemum decoction.
I love those names, by the way.
Yeah, right. Very poetic.
Yeah, they're so evocative.
And this one's particularly interesting because it's meant to address windworm at a very early stage, right?
Okay.
So it really speaks to that other principle of TCM, which is catching imbalances early on before they become something bigger.
Yeah, it's like preventative maintenance for your system.
Exactly, exactly.
But how can you tell the difference between like wind cold, which we were talking about earlier, and wind heat?
Right.
Because, I mean, some of those symptoms sound kind of similar.
Yeah, there can be some overlap in the symptoms, for sure, which is why TCM practitioners are really looking at all these little nuances, all these details.
Right.
So while both involve wind, the presence of heat really changes things.
Right.
So with wind heat, you're more likely to have a fever, you might have a red face, you might be thirsty for cold drinks.
Oh, interesting.
It's like your internal thermostat has been cranked up a little bit.
Oh, I see. So it's like the difference between like a chilly breeze and then like a hot, dry wind. Like both can kind of throw you off balance.
Right.
But they require a different approach to get back to that like sense of harmony.
Exactly, exactly.
What I find really fascinating about this document is it doesn't just like list these formulas, but it also talks about like modifications you can make based on individual symptoms.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point.
So it gives the example of like if someone has a cough, but it also has like thick yellow phlegm, there are specific herbs that can be added to that mulberry leaf and chrysanthemum decoction, right?
Exactly.
To address that particular presentation.
That really highlights that personalized approach that is so central to TCM.
Right.
Like, these formulas aren't meant to be one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
They're really tailored to the individual's unique presentation based on, a really thorough assessment of their symptoms, their constitution, their overall health.
So it's like, like a recipe almost. Like you can tweak it a little bit depending on what you have on hand, what you're going for.
I love that analogy. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really about like understanding the underlying principles.
Right.
And then kind of adapting as needed.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so speaking of adaptation, maybe we should shift gears from wind heat to something that is, well, maybe not as glamorous, but it's definitely a universal experience. This document goes into a lot of detail about constipation.
Oh, yeah. Constipation. It's a big one.
Right. It's a big one. And it seems like they take it really seriously.
They do.
Because this section, purgation, Yang-Ming syndrome, has like a whole bunch of different formulas, each with its own specific purpose, it looks like.
Right. And that's because, again, TCM doesn't see constipation as just this one thing. It sees it as a symptom of different underlying imbalances. And just like with those modifications we were talking about, choosing the right formula really depends on what's causing that stagnation in the first place.
So it's not just about like getting things moving again. It's like, why have things slowed down?
Exactly.
What's going on there?
So, for example, you've got the major order of the key decoction, right?
Okay.
That one is indicated for what's called extreme excess heat in TCM.
Okay.
And the herbs in that formula are known for their, like, strong purging action.
Interesting.
Which makes sense if you think about, like, heat, how
Yeah.
it tends to dry things out, create stagnation.
So it's like you're trying to clear a clogged pipe with like a really strong blast of water.
Exactly. A very powerful image. But then contrast that with rhubarb and aconite decoction. That one is for what TTM calls constipation due to cold accumulation.
So it's like the opposite problem almost.
Right. So the approach is totally different. Instead of purging that heat, this formula uses warming herbs to actually break up the cold that's causing the stagnation.
Wow. So two seemingly similar symptoms,
All right.
but completely different approaches based on that root cause.
Exactly.
That's really fascinating.
Right. And it speaks to how important it is to understand what's actually going on beneath the surface.
Totally. So it seems like, we've been seeing this theme over and over, that TCM is all about like identifying these subtle differences and then tailoring the treatment accordingly.
You got it. It's about recognizing that unique pattern of disharmony within each person.
Yeah.
And then using the right tools from that, vast toolbox of DCM to bring things back into balance.
Exactly. Okay, so I want to shift our focus now from the digestive system to a different kind of flow,
Okay.
which is menstrual regularity.
Right.
So we're in this section harmonizing Xiao-Yang syndrome. This one, I have to say, I was intrigued by this because it talks about using formulas like minor bupleurum decoction for both Xiao-Yang disease and for regulating menstruation. So what's that connection there? It seems like, again, it's about keeping things moving smoothly, would you say?
You're right on the money.
Okay.
Yeah, in TCM, the litter meridian is very closely associated with this smooth flow of qi throughout the body, right?
Right.
And that flow is essential for everything, for overall well-being. And when it comes to menstruation, having that harmonious flow of liver qi is crucial for a regular cycle.
So it's like with constipation, where that stagnation can kind of throw things off. It sounds like if you don't have that smooth flow in the liver meridian, that can impact menstrual regularity as well.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what's so fascinating is how TCM recognizes that the same symptom, right, can manifest in different ways depending on the individual.
Right.
So, for example, let's take the symptom of cold limbs. This document mentions 4 herbs power to relieve cold limbs, and that's typically used for what TCM would call liver qi stagnation in males. But then there's rambling powder, which also addresses cold limbs, but is mainly used for women who are experiencing PMS.
Oh, wow. So same symptom, different formulas. It's like TCM has this whole like detective kit for figuring out what's really going on.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's like they're piecing together all the clues to get that full picture.
Right, exactly. So it sounds like TCM practitioners are really like detectives, right?
They are.
They're using their knowledge and like careful observation, and I'm sure they're asking lots of questions. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Taking a thorough history is key.
Yeah.
To really understand what's at the root of that imbalance.
Okay.
So, in the case of cold limbs, it could be that in men, it's more from stress, lifestyle factors, things like that, that are disrupting the liver qi.
Right.
Whereas in women, it might be much more related to hormonal fluctuations, right, tied to that menstrual cycle.
So fascinating. So same symptom, but potentially very different underlying causes, so different formulas to address that.
Exactly.
Really, really interesting. It's amazing to me how much TCM really does personalize that approach.
It is. It is. And it speaks to the sophistication of this, ancient system of medicine.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of kind of like connecting those dots and seeing how things are interconnected, this last section in this document, exterior-interior syndrome, I thought this was so interesting because it really highlights how TCM views the body as this like interconnected web.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not just about like treating these isolated symptoms, but seeing how like, an imbalance in one area can then impact other areas, right?
100%, yeah.
And what I thought was really interesting about the formulas in this section is they seem to like target multiple imbalances simultaneously,
Yeah, they do.
almost like they're hitting two birds with one stone.
It's that idea that exterior conditions, right? So think about a cold or the flu,
Hmm.
they don't always just stay on the surface, right?
Okay.
They can penetrate deeper, and then they start to affect the internal organs.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, let's say someone have a cough that just won't go away, or they're still having phlegm after they've gotten over a cold.
Yeah.
TCM might view that as, that initial exterior condition, the cold, but it's now moved deeper into the lungs, which is an interior organ.
So that it's like that domino effect we were talking about earlier, like one
Uh-huh.
imbalance can kind of trigger this cascade of issues.
Precisely.
Oh,
And that's where these exterior-interior formulas come in,
Yeah.
because they're designed to address both, right?
Oh, interesting.
Both the root and the branch.
Okay.
So they're going to try to clear out that lingering cold, but then also support the lungs' own ability to heal and recover.
No, it's almost like this two-pronged approach, like you're attacking it from multiple angles to really restore harmony on all those different levels.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, and then there's this 5 accumulation powder. This one I thought was so interesting because it seems to have like a really broad application. Like it addresses, 5 different pathogenic factors. So is it kind of like a multivitamin for imbalances, or is that the wrong way to think about it?
I mean, that's not a bad way to think about it. It's more like, if you have like a master key,
Okay.
that can kind of unlock healing in a lot of different situations.
Okay.
It's really important to remember, those 5 pathogenic factors that we talk about in TCM, wind, cold, heat, dampness, dryness. These aren't just like external forces.
Yeah, right.
They're also reflections of what's going on inside the body.
Right, right. Like an internal imbalance can kind of create that susceptibility.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about like what you're exposed to, but like how your body is responding to those exposures based on its own, unique constitution and all of that.
Exactly. 100%. And, I think this document has given us such a great kind of like glimpse into just how intricate, how sophisticated this system of TCM really is.
It really is.
When it comes to understanding these formulas and how they're applied. And, at the end of the day, it's not just about like memorizing a bunch of herbs and formulas.
Right.
It's really about understanding the body as this complex, interconnected system.
I love that. Yeah, it's so holistic. Well, I feel like this deep dive has been incredible. I feel like I've learned so much and I have like a whole new appreciation for just how deep and how sophisticated traditional Chinese medicine really
It
is.
is, yeah.
I feel like we've only just scratched the surface,
We
though.
really have. There's so much more to explore.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for being here today, for being our guide on this journey through these formulas.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as I have. And it really makes you wonder, right, if these formulas and their applications are even just a small part, a small representation of this, ancient medical system's sophistication, then what other wonders might be hidden within that vast knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine? So keep exploring, everyone, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.